All right. Hello and welcome to the Patriots Go for 7 Fantasy Football Podcast. We're at a new location here in the DeFreitas Enterprises Studios basement. I'm here with my competitor, John B. John, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself? Glad to be here, live for the finals.
I'm doing pretty good. Just trying. I guess my seat's a little. This is what happens when you change locations.
Outside of your comfort zone.
I know. I think we're all set with the sound here, so we're going to take it off. Thank you to everyone for joining. And today's episode, John and I are going to preview our matchup against each other. So, I mean, we may as well just jump into it right from here.
Sure.
And we'll recap what happened yesterday.
Yeah.
But I had Brashad Perriman go wearing the Bucs jersey, the greatest Bucs jersey. Perriman went and scored 13.7 points, solid 100-yard effort. Then you had Edelman follow, and for much of that game, it looked like Edelman was not quite as healthy as we thought.
Yeah.
And he even missed a quarter due to a head injury. Returned at around 6 points at that point and caught a nice long pass. I think it was like a 30-yarder.
Yeah.
And then ended up getting the 2-point conversion.
Towards the end of the game.
At the end, all sudden and true, at the end there, he ends up with 11.7 points. I'd say about an even Saturday for us. Didn't really change how I was looking at the matchup.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the little appetizer, but down to close enough in my book where it didn't really change my thinking going into today. I know there was some tilting on my part with certain flex options, but I think we're just about set in stone at this point.
There we go. Hopefully, we'll see if there were some rumors about Krieger or Alex calling in. We'll see what happens. Alex says he's ready to call in, so I'll let him know. I'll tell him call me when ready.
Always love the guest appearances on the pod.
I think while we wait for Alex to talk a little bit about this season, I think it's been a great year overall for our league.
Yeah.
We had the podcast come on. We've definitely had a lot more discussion. It feels much more like the league did back when we were in college in the heyday. The message board was the equivalent of like an instant messenger app.
I know there was tons of activity, low blows getting thrown left and right, but a little less of that. But still, a couple plugs. But the podcast and the Slack chat I think have really drummed up a lot more interest this year.
Agreed.
With some good rookie additions to the league as well. I know JoJo had started off hot, ended up a little slower than I'm sure she would have liked, but still a nice rookie effort for sure.
And along those lines, we are going to have an award show this year.
Yeah.
And I've heard, rumor has it, Rookie of the Year is one of the titles.
Yeah.
So here's Alex right now. Alex, thanks for joining. We're already live here, but we have you on the table. How's it going? I think we're having some technical difficulties here.
Yeah.
I can hear you now. How's it going?
Good.
Well, I'm sitting here with John B. in the DeFreitas Enterprises Studios, and we were just talking about the league and about to jump into the matchup. But what we were wrapping up was just a lot of the improvements to the league between the podcast and some of the new owners, and I think the Slack chat too. Kind of got to the point where the league was similar to how it was throughout our college years.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that the top story was something that will probably never be replicated as far as the raunchy top stories that were posted back then. I think it was a different stage in everyone's lives. A lot of us were teenagers, so we thought certain things were funny back then that maybe would be a little bit more inappropriate now.
Krieger once posted a really offensive top story that I believe locked down the league by accident.
There were certain thumbnails associated that are not safe for work.
My favorite historic moment of our league was when we were talking last week, chatting about the finals that were coming up, and we were debating whether or not Chris Burns went back-to-back. Apparently, Chris Burns has never gone back-to-back. And we knew because Krieger had a raunchy team logo that all he would say was, "Believe me, I know that photo."
I'm still not convinced that he knows it because it was his photo, or he knows it from staring at it.
Also a possibility.
There's the low blow. Love it.
All right, Alex. Well, what we've talked about so far to get you up to speed is we talked about Brashad Perriman versus Julian Edelman. Perriman had 13.7, Edelman 11.7. And John B. and I, for the most part, said pretty much a draw. Similar players that were in the wide receiver 2 type area. So I don't think anyone got a particular advantage there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if there is any advantage besides the 2 points, I think Edelman is a little bit contributes a little bit more success wise to his team than Perriman does for yours. But with the injuries, you can make the case that that's not true, and that you were really kind of banking on a guy like Perriman to score where he did. So I think a draw is probably about right.
Yeah, definitely agreed there. I see the finally updated the projections. Mike Boone's no longer at 2 points. He's at 11.
Excellent. There we go.
So, but let's go down here. And Alex, we know you only have 10 minutes. So if you want to take the lead on your highlight thoughts on this matchup that we have going on today, you can certainly can.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, you can go player by player. I'll stick around for a little bit, but I just kind of wanted to call in mainly to talk about, how important the bye week is. And I think it's pretty fitting that we get to the championship here and we have the number 1 and number 2 teams. I mean, you guys were going back and forth between, John was 1, but I'm saying you guys were neck and neck with who was going to be 1 and who was going to be 2 the whole year long. So I think it's pretty fitting that you guys ended up winning after the bye, and then that's the matchup of what were the 2 best teams. You can make a case with Jason, but he never quite got there on the standings. So the number 1 and number 2 ranked teams throughout the year ended up being in the championship. So congrats, guys, and I think that's pretty fitting for this year.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it doesn't always work out that way, but it certainly did this season. And
I know we don't always end up with the top 2 teams, but I think the 2 of us were this year, not to go for the humble brag, but I think we are in the buys, glad to be where we are.
Yep.
And it is definitely a key factor. I mean, I was tracking my wild card week stats, and I think I would have been around 120, which would have been pretty close against teams like you, Alex, and Jason that week. So
I put up the lowest points on wild card weekend. So to your point, that free win, really, I wouldn't be here if not for that bye week.
Yeah, the bye week is huge, but that's why it's really important to play well during the season. And, if you have a shot at it, really go all out with your ad drops and try and win every week because, we'll talk about how advantageous it is. And all you need to do is win 1 week and, you're playing in the championship. So It's nice to see it kind of turn out that way. On the flip side, I kind of wish we had at least one upset. If you look at the standings, the first week of the playoffs, we had myself versus Jason, and that was the number 4 versus 5, and the number 4 ended up winning in Jason. And then you look at the Krieger Tony, we had the number 3 and 6, right? And number 3, John Krieger ended up winning. And then the following week, John B ended up beating Jason, and you beat Krieger. So every single week, the higher ranked team won. So it was kind of predictable this year.
Yeah, the only Tony was actually the 3 seed because he won the division, but Krieger had the better record. So
right. Yep.
So I think you're right in the theory of what happened. But of course, our weird seeding in our league with the divisions, which I'm sure will be discussed in the offseason potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at this matchup, I think what's interesting here, and before we get into the player by player, I do want to point out it's going to come down to John B having a couple players in the night games to catch up to whatever score I put up, because after the 4 p.m.s, John has Pat Mahomes, he has Mike Boone on Monday, and I believe one other player. Allen Robinson tonight. So he has 3 players in the night games. I only have Tyreek Hill, who is tied to Pat Mahomes. So in some fashion, unless my team completely tanks, John B is going to have a number at the end of the 4 o'clock games. He's going to have to go over in order to win.
Yeah, definitely. And as we know from playing fantasy, if you guys know that, one of the most nerve-wracking things to cheer for is the position you're going to be in, Brandon, where you're going to have a certain point.
I hate
you're
that.
just going to be sitting there watching the games, hoping that points don't come on the board. That's the worst position to be in.
You always feel like this hope when you have a player left, but when you don't, you're like, and no matter how big the number is, you always can see the downside to it being achieved.
Yeah, I know you've been up like 30 on Monday night games before and had blow-up situations where you end up losing. So that's not a feeling that's nice to have.
But let's look at this position by position. Quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson. I have him playing at Cleveland, and John has Pat Mahomes at Chicago, both quarterbacks on the road. Jackson's been this season's breakout player. Like, if we remember your first ship, Alex, that was the LT year. Regardless of how this championship goes, this is going to be the Lamar Jackson year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, Jackson, John said going into this, he has something he wants to say about Jackson potentially being the difference maker. Yeah. So let's see what he has to say.
Yeah, no, just for me, I think, it's no surprise since he's been the number one player in fantasy this year. But to me, Lamar Jackson is kind of the X factor of this matchup, and it starts and ends with him. We'll get to the other matchups, but I just think he's such a high upside player. Mm-hmm. He's putting so many ridiculous points up on the board. Not to tip my hand, but I think he may end up being the difference maker in this finals.
Yeah, it's the thing is Pat Mahomes has a chance to also be a difference maker. So it's good. Like, if you remember, you had Aaron Rodgers last year in the finals, who didn't really do a ton all season.
Yeah.
And he popped off for like 4 or 5 touchdowns in the finals. I wouldn't be half surprised if Mahomes does the same, even against a tough Chicago defense. But you're right. I think this is the way it's been for my team all season. And we saw it last week when Lamar put up 49 or something. That kind of an effort could just completely swing the final matchup.
Exactly. I know I'm hoping he comes back to earth a little bit, but those type of outputs are always in play for him. And yeah, to your point about Mahomes, obviously he's regressed a little bit this year, and I was kind of tilting on quarterback this week before all the Dak news came out with his shoulder injury. But just last week against a tough Broncos defense, I feel like he looked a little more like himself. So I'm hoping he can keep that train rolling this week.
Mm-hmm.
That was a bad weather game, too, over there in Denver, and he ended up producing. I definitely think that, not to take the easy route here, but the quarterback battle is I think, going to be the difference. And last week for Brandon's game, I ended up saying that the first-round picks were going to be a difference, and they definitely weren't in that game. So, take my predictions with a grain of salt. But I definitely think that if Lamar Jackson can produce a 35-plus point game, that's going to give Brandon an edge, unless Pat Mahomes also blows up. But one of the interesting storylines here, too, is Brandon, you have Tyreek Hill, who is Pat Mahomes' main target. Mm-hmm. So I think normally you might say, well, that kind of limits what Reek is going to do. But in this quarterback battle, I think that works to your advantage. And just how reliable Tyreek Hill is, you're like, well, Pat Mahomes goes out for 40, chances are Tyreek Hill is going to get a bomb and end up with 20. So I think it hedges your chances a little bit there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't really think too much about that, because sometimes you consider benching the receiver when you're against the quarterback, but being Tyreek Hill, there was no chance on this planet I would bench Tyreek Hill. Yeah. But you're right that if Mahomes' touchdowns mainly, let's say, I think last week he threw 2 touchdowns to Tyreek Hill. That could severely limit any upside for John in the games. Those are the night games he's trying to come back. So that's nice.
That limits the ability of Mahomes to make up ground that I'll need to make up.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, we'll move on from the quarterbacks. I think we've covered that pretty well. We'll talk a little bit about the running backs now. And I have Carson in the flex only because of the time of his game. I always play this game where the later games I put in the flex just in case I need to pivot. But in reality, my starting running backs are Carson and Miles Sanders going up against Zeke and Mike Boone. Mike Boone ended up being a huge pickup for you last week, John. Yeah. We didn't know what was going on with the Vikings backfield, but it looks like he's going to be the primary guy now, and a nice matchup against Green Bay. And then you have Ezekiel Elliott, who, while it is a tougher run defense in Philadelphia, we've seen Zeke tear up the Eagles in the past too. So I think, your running backs all season have been the engine, and it's unfortunate that in the finals, Dalvin Cook isn't there, but I think Mike Boone's a nice substitute.
Yep, exactly. Obviously prefer to have a healthy Cook compared to the alternative, but I just think if Boone can at least, it sounds like Madison's going to be out as well, so he should be kind of the workhorse back for that team, and like you said, a pretty good matchup. So if he can give me 80%, 90% of what Cook would give me, then I'm totally comfortable with that. And then Zeke, it's just a locked and loaded RB1. He's been tearing it up the last few weeks, so hoping he keeps that rolling this week. But overall, I feel like the running back matchup's pretty even. Carson, I see him ranked like number 1 or number 2 in the weekly rankings on a lot of
Yeah.
sites, like with that juicy matchup against the Cardinals.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then
At
Sanders
home, too.
Yep. So he should be able to produce a lot for you. And then
Mhm.
Sanders had that blow up week last week. So
Yep.
we'll see how he can keep it rolling this week.
Yeah, Sanders took a little while to get going, and now ever since Jordan Howard's been out, he's been a reliable running back too for me. I still, it's funny, Alex, at the end of the season, like even if you were still alive, I still wouldn't know who would have won that trade for us because Josh Allen and Singletary were real solid for you throughout the year and have remained pretty solid plays.
Yeah, I don't think I would have gotten as far if it weren't for them. And then they both haven't done too much in the fantasy playoffs, but like you said, when I really needed them, Miles Sanders wasn't doing too much in that timeshare. So it was definitely one of those, like you said, a rare win-win trades where, I needed the help right away, and then you could kind of sit on Miles Sanders, and here he is. And what did he go off for 30-plus points and against Krieger? So it was just a massive performance from a rookie running back. And it's nice to see kind of these guys start to come into a group at the end of the year because we know how important it is for scouting for next year to look at how these players finish.
Yep.
But definitely some of these guys like Sanders, it will be nice. Probably not top 2 or maybe even third, but if you think he can be a top 5 back next year, all of a sudden you can probably nab him in the 3rd round. So looking at some of those value plays, I think he's going to be one of those guys for next year.
Yeah, and because to your point, I think Doug Peterson being the coach will help suppress Sanders' value enough to the point where he doesn't climb into the 2nd round or the 3rd round range. I mean, in the 2nd or 1st round range.
Yeah.
So, but I do like both those players. I agree with John's assessment. I think it's pretty much even between the running backs that we're starting this week. Receivers, and we have a co-star Millie making an appearance here.
2nd guest appearance.
Yep, always makes a guest appearance. We talked, of course, about the Perriman Edelman even play right there. Let's talk a little bit about the wide receiver ones on these teams, Tyreek Hill versus Amari Cooper. Alex brought up the Tyreek Hill, interesting to have him playing against Mahomes. Helps kind of like both sides are a little bit hedged against a blow up on either way. Yeah. But Amari Cooper is a player who's interesting because at the start of the season, he was looking like a surefire wide receiver 1. He's still had some moments, but it almost looks like he's banged up right now. And with Dak Prescott's shoulder banged up, he has to be a player that you're, a little bit more eerie on than you were earlier in the season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know the last several weeks he's kind of come back down to earth a little bit. And like you said, I feel like he's kind of like Edelman, where he's healthy enough to play, obviously, but definitely not at 100%. And at least against, kind of top tier cornerbacks, he's been shut down when he's gone against those type of guys the last few weeks. But luckily for me, it's a pretty good matchup against a Philly defense that he roasted earlier in the year. So I know he's, the injury is still a concern, but I have to roll him out there, hope that he can reproduce what he was able to do earlier in the season against that vulnerable secondary.
It's much like Edelman, where there were question marks about Edelman going into last night, but it was like, there's no way you're not going to play Julian Edelman, Yeah,
so. Exactly. I know we've had this conversation with ourselves on many occasions, but in the finals, unless there's a great alternative, you got to roll out your studs.
Yep, agreed.
I think Edelman is a little bit more of a baller than Cooper, and playing through injuries. And then you saw him. Johnny must have been a little worried when you went into the blue tent and then the locker room. And I know I called Brandon and he had a little prediction for what happened in that locker room. But if you think, like, what percentage of times do guys that go from the blue tent to the locker room and then come back into the game? I was stunned when I heard that he came back. It's kind of amazing.
I kind of think, I don't want to accuse them of anything, but like a home game and a must win.
Right.
It's kind of like in the Super Bowl where Edelman didn't get checked out by the independent neurologist.
Edelman is clearly unconscious. I think it was the Seattle Super Bowl. And then he's out there like 2 plays later. In
these big games, you see the NFL teams, I think they just take a chance and let them keep playing. But you're right, Alex. Usually when they go to the locker room, and I was at the game last night, way up in the upper decks. It was a great game to be at. And one of the advantages being in the upper decks is you can see the entire field. And when I was watching, I was like, Edelman's not even on the sideline. I was like, where is he? And it was the weirdest thing. And for at the beginning of the game, they would pull him off for some like second downs or stuff when they were clearly running and bring him in for the obvious third downs. But they even stopped doing that in that third quarter.
Right.
And I was like, I don't know what's going on, but Edelman's not out there. And it was a little bit strange. But, Alex, is Amari Cooper one of those players? I know that you can't stand most of the Brando receivers. You don't like Mike Evans. You're always team Godwin. I know you're team Mike Williams over Keenan Allen. Is Amari Cooper one of those players for you too?
I just think that Cooper needs to be healthy to really go out and contribute. And then I think in some key moments, he just has some plays. I mean, everyone has some drops, but I forget what game it was. It might have actually been the Thanksgiving game. I think it was before that, though, where he'd have this slant pass, and it just went right off his hands. It was picked off. Mm-hmm. It was just one of those plays that I feel like if you're one of these top 3, top 4 wideouts in the league, you kind of got to catch that ball, or you can't have balls going off your hands and getting intercepted. He really had a breakout year last year, which was nice to see. And at the start of the season, he was looking like a top 3, top 4 fantasy wideout. So I definitely think John's got to roll him out, but I'd be a little bit weary, and it's one of those things. If you did have a better play, especially with the banged up Dak, but the Cowboys are in must-win game territory. So, he's got to go out and contribute. So it'll be interesting to see from a pure football standpoint if he can go out and work through his injury and really man up over there.
Yeah. He has been one of those players. He's played through his injuries all year, but he has been like just inconsistent throughout his career, which I think is interesting. And maybe it's a lack of physicality or something like that, Mm-hmm. But certainly a great matchup against Philadelphia, and we covered Tyreek Hill. The tight ends, there's no Darren Waller on the Waller Bills, but there is Austin Hooper. I'm rolling out Mark Andrews. I picked up Jacob Hollister yesterday, not because I was going to start him over Andrews, but I had Hollister and Ryan Fitzpatrick in the wings in case the Patriots lost that game. I had concerns about the Ravens potentially benching Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews for the last 2 weeks, so I needed to have a pivot. But I am rolling out the guy I've gone with all season. John's going with Hooper. I think this is one of the areas, John, where you have a clear advantage right now because of that matchup. Mm-hmm. Jacksonville's just been giving up a ton of points lately, outside of that Oakland game last week. So this is one of those points. And even in that Oakland game, Darren Waller had a monster performance last week, over 100 yards. So I think Hooper is slated for a big day, whereas Andrews has been a little hit or miss this season, depending on if he scores a touchdown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. I mean, Hooper obviously missed a good chunk of time this year with the MCL injury, I think. And he's come back the last few weeks and been kind of disappointing with just a couple catches for 30 or so yards each week. But I think his snap share is back up to where, pretty regular numbers for him. So I'm hoping he can put together a good game against, like you said, this vulnerable Jacksonville defense and help bring home a championship for me. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Andrew's obviously you said he's a top 5? He's definitely up there.
Yeah,
one of
he's
the better
the 4th
tight ends
on the season.
Year.
Yep.
I think the Ravens have a good chance to put up a lot of points against that Cleveland defense. So if Andrews can get at least one touchdown for you, then that's a nice week for you.
Well, that's why I'm rolling him out there. I've played him all season. He's been one of the better tight ends all year, and I'm just going to keep on, throwing him out there. I'm not going to pivot in a championship game and potentially regret that.
Right.
But it's not that I'm making it because of this, but sometimes you have these decisions of like how confident are you feeling in making a pivot? Because if I switch to Hollister and Hollister bombs and Andrews goes big, I'm going to be thinking about that for years to come, if I don't win the game.
Yeah.
So
that's the type of decision that haunts you.
You play your studs when you get to the finals. And I think, considering, I think it's probably fairly even between Andrews and Hollister. So I think I'm going to roll out Mark Andrews.
That's the type of decision, though, that, I made in not taking the knee, and then I ended up losing because of it. So, I think it's a little different.
Devil's advocate.
Andrews has been a stud, so I can't blame you there. But that was exactly my thought process. I'm like, well, if I take the knee and then lose because of it, I'm like, really, I kind of knew that Tony's team was more hit or miss, and But then again, I would have gotten smoked against you the following week.
Yeah.
So
that always makes you feel better.
Yeah, it does make the one way, because I was thinking about it, that I actually could have made it all the way to the championship, where it would be if John B took a knee to switch that side of the bracket, then I would have beaten Tony. And I think if I rolled out Kenyon Drake, who I believe went for like 30 plus points, I think I might have had John in the second game. But who knows if I would have started Drake anyways. I'm rolling him out this week in the 5th place bowl. But yeah, that was the only shot. So I feel pretty good. And that taking the knee wouldn't have gotten me all the way to the championship, most likely. So fine there. I do have one more question before I go for you, Brandon. That it looks like you were holding on to Kerryon Johnson, who was on injured reserve on your bench. Obviously, in the past, a tie would have gone to the bench points, but with the 2-place decimal scoring, a tie is very, very unlikely. But why are you still holding on to him?
So I actually held on to him to prevent John from starting Kerryon. And it's interesting. So John's starting. It's that second flex spot where Chris Godwin manned the whole season for John. He's got Greg Ward in there. And I picked up Kerryon right before last week thinking that I might need him as a flex. And then, of course, Anthony Miller popped. Connor looked good. So, I have other options now. But I didn't want to release him to waivers and give John an option to start a player who I think is immensely talented and is going to get, I would say, double-digit carries. He's going to get 15 or so opportunities today. So I kind of just wanted to hold on to him so he wasn't an option for John in that flex spot.
Oh, so he's not on IR anymore.
He got activated this week for week 16 and 17.
Oh, okay. Interesting. That makes sense then.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm going to get back to it before these games, but if I don't make it down, then good luck to both of you guys, and it'll be interesting to see this play out. Who's going to get that final $180 Venmo?
All right.
Thanks for calling in, Alex.
Thanks, Alex. Always appreciate it.
Talk to you guys later.
All right, talk to you later. Yeah, so that it's funny how Alex has the bench points. I don't know if at some point me and you are going to do a mass drop and mass pick up of quarterbacks,
right?
But like his point with the decimal points for quarterbacks, the chances we actually tie are completely minuscule.
Yeah, in the past with full point scoring, maybe I'd consider a little more, but that hasn't crossed my mind this week.
I actually have a proposal for you to be documented on the podcast.
Oh.
In the event of a tie, would you agree to the Week 17 rematch instead of bench points, or do you want to do bench points?
I think I'd be willing to roll with the Week 17 rematch.
All right, let's agree.
All right,
so in the event of a tie, Because to be honest, Week 17, there's a chance Lamar doesn't play all that bullshit. Yep. But I still think it makes more sense than fucking bench points.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when we're kind of constructing our benches this week. Yeah, a lot of players we would consider starting as opposed to higher upside quarterbacks. So we're not going to start over our number one quarterbacks, for example. So
I will also point out, I will do the gentleman's if Chris Godwin's back next week, he's all yours type deal. So we're agreed to it now on the cast. It's been documented. So I just like I said, I don't want to win a championship on bench points. Right. That would just be the lamest championship of all time.
Absolutely.
So awesome. I'm glad we could agree on that. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Yeah. So we're getting towards the end of the matchup here, and it's the two flex positions. I think DeAndre Washington versus Allen Robinson. Is that really what? Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, that's the one right there. DeAndre Washington and Allen Robinson are two players who are locked in.
Oh, yeah.
Washington's getting the full load right now for Oakland against a weak Chargers run defense. Mm-hmm. They'll need to spend a ton of time there. And Allen Robinson, I heard a stat on the Fantasy Footballers that since week 4, Allen Robinson is the 4th best receiver in fantasy football. He's been so consistent. These are his last games, 22, 18, 19, 16.
Yeah, he's been a locked and loaded starter for me. All season, but the last 5 or 6 weeks especially, he's been a pretty legitimate wide receiver, low end 1, high end 2 type of guy.
This was your handpicked sleeper, if I understand correctly. You have shares in him in just about every league you were in this year.
Yeah, he's a guy. I saw him going 5th, 6th rounds ADP, and I just saw the upside there as a really talented receiver. I thought the Bears offense would be a little better than they've been this season.
We all did.
but still they've been producing enough, and he's talented enough where he's been consistently producing all season outside of a couple duds. But hopefully not one of those this week.
But I think what we need to cover, and before we do it, because this is the big part of the matchup, the defenses. I have the Steelers D playing the Jets. I think it's a solid matchup. And you have the Broncos D at home against Detroit and David Bloss. So,
exactly.
Good matchups there. I'm kind of hoping defenses just don't make the determining factor, but it is part of the game.
Yeah, it was last week for me.
It certainly was. It certainly was. But the flex position or players we're playing that have been debated the most is me playing James Conner away against the New York Jets and you playing Greg Ward against Dallas.
Yeah.
And I'll start it off by saying I'm going James Conner over Anthony Miller for the pure reason that I feel like James Conner is guaranteed a good amount of touches in that offense. I would expect him to get 15 or so touches, maybe even more, against the Jets defense that it isn't terrible against the run, but the Jets aren't a great team. So I think the Steelers are going to win that game. I think they're going to have goal line opportunities, and I expect James Conner to score a touchdown today. Or I would say that the chances of Conner scoring versus Anthony Miller are higher on the Conner end. So I'm going there. The thing with Anthony Miller is there's still the Trubisky factor. The Kansas City pass defense has been awesome. And Miller's still, no matter – I know he had 15 targets last week, but he's still second fiddle to Allen Robinson.
Yeah.
So given all that, I think a number 2 receiver on a team has a higher chance of being a dud than a number 1 running back who I spent a first-round pick on.
Yeah, sure.
So, I just think Conner looked good enough to get the start there, and that's why I'm going to roll out James Conner.
Yep. No, I think it's I can see the kind of the upside to both. Miller's been consistent the last 4 or 5 weeks, putting up 15 plus points, I think. But yeah, like you said, the Bears offense can be pretty inconsistent. Playing second fiddle to Allen Robinson. It's a pretty tough matchup going against a KC secondary that's been coming on strong towards the end of the season. And with Conner, I think that should be the Jets have a pretty middling defense, like you said. They're not a shutdown defense against the run by any means. And I could see them having a lead for a good chunk of that game and having a positive game script for you in that regard. So I can see why you lean Conner in this case.
And I know this could make the difference. And not to do the Alex thing, but I think me and you have played in a lot of high leverage fantasy games. And it's not about who, maybe I said it wrong. It's not about who you're not going to regret playing. It's that Conner and Andrews are 2 players that I know. I scouted them. I felt like I had a strong opinion for them. Miller's the recent hotness, who is looking pretty good lately, and I just feel like I've made the mistake several times in the past where I've gone with the new hotness over the player that I thought was the better player.
Yeah,
and you just need to play the better play, and I feel like that's James Conner for my team. So you on the other side, it's been tough, and it's been unfortunate with what happened with Chris Godwin. But Greg Ward is the guy you're going with here. He's looked really good lately. Got 9 targets last week. Your other options, John, look like Dion Lewis potentially in the workhorse role against New Orleans, John Ross at Miami, or Sammy Watkins at Chicago. So if you could take me through that decision.
Yeah, so this has obviously been the position on my team I've been tilting the most on all week because I know kind of with my team construction this year, I had handcuffs for my running back. So with Mike Boone, I was able to be prepared if one of those guys went down. But with receiver, I kind of handcuffed myself or screwed myself, I guess, without having enough depth there. So the Godwin injury certainly stings. But I picked up a bunch of guys I feel like, either have a chance to see a lot of targets or catch a couple bombs potentially. So I ended up going Greg Ward. He's seen, I think, 9 targets the last 2 weeks. So I like that target share for sure. Dallas is a solid secondary, so it's not the juiciest matchup, but I guess I'm playing kind of the safe bet here with Ward that he'll continue to see a good amount of targets and hopefully rack up some yards today. Some of the other guys, John Ross, I was playing around a little bit with. He's definitely in that boom or bust type of mold where you hope he catches a bomb, and obviously that's enough for the day. He's playing Miami, who has a pretty awful secondary, so that's kind of the reasoning there. But I can just foresee a goose egg potentially as a pretty high percentage outcome there.
I think I was actually researching John Ross because I was going to pick him up as a block move for you, and I saw he had 38% snap share against the Patriots, and I was like, I'll just leave him out there. But like, I'm not disparaging Ross at all. Like, the thing is, I'd be pretty scared only because like, you don't know. This is the pure like just like
he could blow up.
It takes one play. You never know. I will say draft day John B. That guy's a gunslinger. We've seen him in past years with the Ezekiel Elliott picks a couple years in a row. I think draft day John B. might be the John Ross guy.
Sometimes I go with the dangerous draft early round selections. With, potentially this was the year Zeke was ended up getting suspended with PDs, or I forget what the suspension was for, but that ended up biting me towards the end of the season. So it can definitely be hit or miss.
That was the worst season I remember because he challenged it, was able to play early in the fantasy season for you, but then was out for the fantasy playoffs. And you were like, what the hell?
Not the end I was hoping for. And then I guess just quickly to wrap up some of the other guys I was toying around with this week. I picked up Chris Conley, who would have been the preferred start for me this week, but DJ Chark is back. And in that Jacksonville starting lineup. So you figure Conley sees a decrease in, snaps and targets there. And then Sammy Watkins, I was never really going to start. It was just clearing out other bench players I definitely wasn't going to start. And then Justin Watson, I was considering starting yesterday. He was kind of the Godwin replacement. I think he ended up with 50 yards and a touchdown, so a pretty solid outing. I guess I was just kind of in my head getting locked into that Saturday player without fully knowing some of the Sunday and Monday starting situations. I didn't want to get locked in too soon. So we'll see if that ends up biting me. But yeah, it's looking like Greg Ward's going to be the guy for me going into today.
Well, we have a half hour left. So is Ward at 1 o'clock? No, he's a 4:25. And John Ross is a 1 o'clock, but Sammy Watkins is 8:20. So
chance to pivot
Dion's a 1.
Oh yeah, I forgot about Dion Lewis, who I picked up yesterday. Derrick Henry ruled out today. So Dion, you figure to be the starting running back for Tennessee, but just kind of looking at his numbers this year, they haven't been there. I know Henry's the workhorse running back on that team, but you'd imagine Dion would at least get some receptions, and that just hasn't really been the case. So
it hasn't.
I figure even with him and theoretically that starting role against a good Saints defense, I don't think that's the right move either. So, we'll see at the end of the day who ends up popping or not. So
for sure, we definitely will. Well, good luck to you.
You as well, sir.
A little bit of a shorter podcast today, but thank you all for listeing. Looking forward to the finals, and we'll have the superlative show next week.
Excellent.
So maybe we can get Alex and Krieger to call in for that. And we'll be crowning the champion. I think this is going down to the Monday night game. I just think the teams, injuries to both sides, and I think they're pretty evenly matched to the point where Mike Boone's going to end up deciding this on Monday. Will it be? I'm kind of expect it to be an under 20-point expectation for Boone to the point where we're both going to be sweating it out. So we'll see what happens. I'm looking forward to it. Good luck to you, of course, and everyone out there. Thanks. So we'll catch you next week, and one of us will be crowned a 2-time champion in the league. So. All right. That's it from us. Thanks again.
All right. Thanks, everyone. All right. Nice.
Yeah.